going to discuss vector addition. This is a continuation of our previous topic on scalars and vectors. So in this lesson, we are going to discuss the graphical and analytical method, which is a method in adding or subtracting vectors. Okay, so to start with, recall the vector is a quantity that has magnitude and direction. So in one-dimensional or straight-line motion, the direction of the vector can simply be given by a plus or minus sign, or a positive or negative sign. So a motion in forward, going to the right, or in upward direction is considered as positive. On the other hand, if the motion is going backward, going to the left, or going downward, it is considered as negative. While in two dimensions, a vector describes motion in two perpendicular directions, such as vertical and horizontal. So for vertical and horizontal motion, each vector is made up of what we call vertical and horizontal components. Okay. So in graphical method, we have this head-to-tail method na tinatawag. Okay. Or here, this is a graphical way to add vectors. The tail of the vector is the starting point, and the head of the vector is the end of the arrow. So, for example, you have here a problem. A person walks 9 blocks east and 5 blocks north. The displacement is 10.3 blocks at an angle 29.10 north of west. So, ito siya yung problem. Meron na siyang answer. Okay, si displacement niya is 10.3 blocks at an angle 29.1 north of east. So, how do we do this method? Okay, for the step 1, you first draw an arrow to represent the first vector. You can use a ruler or a protractor. So, given na yung axis natin, we all know that the Cartesian plane is composed of your x and y axis. So, we will just draw your 9 blocks going to the east. That's in this side. Ayan na si 9 blocks, 9 units going to the east. And then, draw an arrow to represent the second vector. So, this is your second vector. This is 5 blocks to the north. And then, place the tail of the second vector at the head of the first vector. Okay, so, kung saan nag-end yung first vector natin, doon ninyo idudugtong si second vector natin. And now, to solve for the resultant vector, you use a ruler or a protractor para ma-solve ninyo, ma-approximate ninyo yung distance by using a ruler. So, this is approximately 10.3 units. Tapos, yung angle naman, makukuha ninyo siya by using a protractor. Okay. Now, what if there are more than 2 vectors? So, you just continue this process to each vector to be added. Note that in our example, we only have 2 vectors. So, we have finished placing the arrows tip to tail. Okay. And then, draw an arrow from the tail of the first vector to the head of the last vector. This is the resultant or the sum of the other vectors. Okay, so you just connect kung saan kayo nag-start, that's the tail. And then kung saan kayo nag-end, yun naman yung head na resultant vector natin. Okay. So for the graphical method, you always have your ruler and protractor para ma-solve ninyo kung ilan si resultant vector. So to get the direction of the resultant, measure the angle it makes with the reference frame using a protractor. So in this case, si protractor, ipi-place nyo dapat siya along with the x-axis. Okay. Tapos yung angle na na-make or yung angle na na-make ni resultant vector, that is now your direction. So yung angle niyo, it is enough to indicate the direction of your vector. Tapos yung magnitude ninyo, masasolve ninyo siya or makikita ninyo siya by using a ruler. So for the vector subtraction naman, this is just an addition of vectors. Naging subtraction lang siya kapag yung isang vector is going in the opposite direction. Kasi kapag nasa opposite direction, yung isang vector, magiging negative siya. Okay? So the order of subtraction does not really affect the results. So for example, A minus B, it is like adding two vectors, tapos yung isang vector ninyo, nasa negative direction lang siya. Okay? So that is what we call the vector subtraction. Now what about for the analytical method? So this is different from your graphical method. Different siya, but you can still come up with the same answer. But the disadvantage of using the graphical method, it could be inaccurate or medyo malayo siya doon sa exact answer natin. Okay? Because analytical method uses geometry and trigonometry, and here we can apply different concepts from algebra. So for a refresher on the definition of the sine, cosine, and tangent of an angle, we have here your right triangle. Okay, so dito na natin maa-apply si trigonometric function, okay, which is the SOHCAHTOA. Okay, your sine, opposite over hypotenuse, cosine, adjacent over hypotenuse, tangent, opposite over adjacent. In this case, we used x, y, and h. Your h is your hypotenuse, your x is the adjacent, and then your y is the opposite side. And then your angle is represented by theta. Okay, so since by definition, your cosine theta is equivalent to x over h, we can find your length, yung length ni x, by using x is equal to h cosine theta. So you just simply transpose. Ang ginawa dito, multiply nyo lang both sides by h para makancel si h sa isang side. And then your x will now be equivalent to h cosine theta. The same with your y, where they use the sine theta. Okay, so if this sine theta, i-multiply ninyo siya both sides by h, magiging equivalent na siya kay y equal to h sine theta. So these trigonometric relationships are useful for adding vectors. So yan yung mga kailangan ninyong tandaan. Mostly, we are going to use analytical method in our lesson. Okay. So, for the component vectors, this is important when we are dealing with vectors that are perpendicular. Okay? Or even vectors na hindi siya maka-form ng right angle. So, applicable pa rin si component vectors. So, what is this component vectors? We have the x and y component. For example, dito sa illustration, you have here vector A. Meron yan siyang y, tinatawag na y component, and x component. This is what we call the component vectors. Now, when you add ax and then ay, it will result to your vector A, or your resultant vector A. Hindi nyo to siya i-add diretso. Okay? It goes through a process which we call the Pythagorean Theorem since naka-form siya ng right angle. Okay? So, hindi nyo siya pwede i-add ax plus ay. I mean, the value of ax and then the value of ay is just equivalent to a. No. So, you have to solve for the a, which is your hypotenuse. Okay? Since hindi siya continuous or hindi continuous yung vector natin. Unless, if they are going in the same direction, you can add it directly. Okay? So, to find for ax and ay, its x and y components, we use the following relationships for a right triangle. So take note, this is for a right triangle. So AX, or your X component for A, is equivalent to A cosine theta, and then AY is equivalent to A sine theta. So you always remember this relationship. Okay? So this will be useful in our solving. Okay, so example, we have here the same example with the graphical method, pero ginawa lang siya into analytical method. Paano siya gagawing analytical method? For example, given C, A, vector A, which is 10.3 blocks, and then your angle is 29.1 degrees. So you are going to look for your Y and X component. Now, this is your Y component. AY is equal to A sine theta. So you plug in the values, you will just get 5 blocks to the north. And then the same with the X component, or your AX, you use A cosine theta. You plug in the values. This is your A, this is your theta. You will get 9 blocks going to the east. So, yung difference lang ni graphical at saka ni analytical method, si graphical, hindi siya nag-undergo ng solving. Okay, you just use your ruler and then your protractor to look for your resultant vector and then your angle. Unlike for the analytical method, dumadaan siya ng solving. Okay, so, you have to familiarize different equations na useful siya for solving your resultant vectors and then your component vectors. So, important formulas here to remember, or important relationships na kailangan niyo tandaan, is your Pythagorean Theorem. That's C squared is equal to A squared plus B squared. So, interchangeable naman yung variables niya. Depende doon sa given natin. And then, you have to remember that we have your trigonometric functions, the SOHCAHTOA, your sine is equal to opposite over hypotenuse, cosine adjacent over hypotenuse, and then your tangent opposite over adjacent. So yun lang yung kailangan ninyong tandaan. Okay, so for example, a man drives 10 miles north and then 20 miles east. What are the magnitude and direction of his displacement from the starting point? Okay, so let's say we have here your Cartesian plane. So this is now your Cartesian plane. Okay, with directions north, east, west, and south. Okay, so your first direction is 10 miles going to the north. So this is, we'll consider it as your vector A. So this is 10 miles going to the north, and then 20 miles going to the east. Okay, so that's 20 miles going to the east. Let's call this vector B. And then we are going to look for your displacement from the starting point. Okay, so this is now your resultant vector. Okay, so how to look for your resultant vector, or how to solve for your resultant vector? Again, we are going to use the Pythagorean Theorem. Okay, why Pythagorean Theorem? It is applicable since it forms right angle dito. Okay, since we have now a right triangle. So, pwede natin gamitin si Pythagorean Theorem. Okay, so how to solve for the magnitude of R? We will use your Pythagorean Theorem, the square root of your A squared plus B squared. Okay, again, bakit wala ng arrow dito sa itaas? It's because this is just your magnitude. Okay, yung direction natin mamaya, isosolve natin siya using your SOHCAHTOA. Okay, now you plug in the values, that's 10 miles squared plus 20 miles squared. Okay, and then you add the square of the two and you solve for the square root. You will get R is equal to 22.5.
miles. Okay, so meron ka ng magnitude. Ngayon, hahanapin na natin si direction. Okay, so we already solved for the magnitude. We are now going to look for your direction. Okay, so how to solve for your direction? We will use your tan theta over I is equal to opposite over adjacent. Okay, that's your TOA from your SOHCAHTOA. Okay, you can also use your SO and then your Ka since meron naman tayong hypotenuse which is your 22.36 miles. Okay, so in this case, I will just use the tangent. Okay, and then you can write this tan theta. Your opposite is opposite of your, okay, let's say this is what we are trying to look for. Okay, itong theta na ito yung hahanapin natin. Okay, so opposite of this one is your B over your adjacent, that's A. B is 20 miles over 10 miles. Okay, that's just 2. Okay, cancel ito siya. Okay, and then you perform the tan inverse. Or theta is equal to tan inverse 2. This will give you 63.43 degrees. Okay. So this is not yet your answer for the direction. Why? Because dapat with respect siya dito sa ating plane. Okay. This one. Okay. Let's say this is your, I don't know what it's called, your phi. Okay, let's say that's phi. Okay, so you just minus or subtract 90 degrees minus 63.43 degrees. Okay, i-minus nyo lang siya. This will have 26.57 degrees. Okay, so in this case, you have two angles. Okay, or we solve for two angles. Ito pa rin si magnitude natin. Okay, so how to write your final answer? It could be your resultant vector is equal to 22.36 miles. Okay, and then we can use this theta, itong si 63.43 degrees. Tapos, ilalagay nyo kung saan siya na direction. Okay? It could be east of north or north of east. Okay? Since galing siya from this point to this point na angle, okay, pag ganon, pag ganyan, okay, so this is east of north. Okay, so you just write E of N. Okay? Or, you can use this one. Ito siya. Itong sinolve natin. Where gi-minus natin siya from 90 degrees. You can have it as R is equal to 22.36 miles. Wait lang. 26.57 degrees north of east. Okay. Bakit north of east? Since papunta siyang north, galing kay east. So, north of east. So, either of these two is correct. Okay. As long as ganito yung na-form ninyo na na illustration or na drawing. Okay. You can also neglect this one. Okay. Pero mas specified kasi yung direction natin kapag gagamitan natin ng ganito. Okay. Okay, so we have here another example. A car that moves with a displacement A of 275 meters due east, and then with a displacement B of 125 meters in a direction 55 degrees north of west. What is the resultant displacement vector R of the car? Okay. So again, we are going to use your Cartesian plane with the following directions: north, east, west, and south. Okay, so your first direction is going to the east, 275 meters. Okay, so let's say this is 275 meters going to the east, and then it went north of west. Okay, so let's assume another Cartesian plane here. Okay, north and south. Since north of west siya, your angle must went from, this is your west, north to west. Okay, that's 55 degrees. Okay, let's say this is 55 degrees. And then this is your 125 displacement. Okay. Now, we are going to look for your displacement vector or your resultant vector. So we follow your tail to head method. So this is your tail, then this is your head. Okay, so this is now your R. Okay, ito yung isa-solve natin. Okay, so see that this is not a right triangle. Okay, so here we are not going to use your law of sine or cosine. Kasi, given tayo ng dalawang, only two directions, and then one angle. Okay. So, kulang yung variables natin for us to use your law of sine or your law of cosine. Okay, so there is another way in order for us to solve this using the vector components. Okay, so how to use your vector components? Iso-solve natin itong side na ito ni R at itong side na ito ni R. Okay. Kasi yan yung bumubuo kay R. This side and then this side. Pag na-solve na natin itong dalawang to, makukuha natin yung value ni R. Okay, so how to solve it? This is your vector B. Then this is your vector A. Okay. This one is equivalent to your by. Okay. That is your y component for vector B. Masosolve niyo yan using B sine theta. Okay. Your theta here is 55 degrees. Okay. And then, we are going to look for your x component ni B. Okay, that's bx over is equal to b cosine theta. Okay, this is your y component, this is your x component. Ito si x component ni B. Okay, this is your bx. Klaro ba? This is your bx, and then this side is your by. Okay? So, kapag nakuha na natin si bx, ima-minus natin siya sa magnitude ni a para makuha natin yung value nito. Okay? So, the magnitude of a is actually 275 meters. Yan yung magnitude ni a. Since si A is along your x direction lang siya, this is your x-axis, this is your y. Okay. Since si A is nasa x-axis lang siya, ibig sabihin, yung AY natin is 0. Okay? Kasi wala siyang value for y. And then your ax is the same with your magnitude. That's 275 meters. Kasi nakalay doon sa x-axis si vector A. Okay, unlike kay vector B, na pwede siyang kukuha ng component niya kay y-axis at kukuha ng component niya kay x-axis. Okay, kaya meron siyang by and then bx. Okay? Okay, so para ma-solve natin itong rx natin, okay, or x component ni r, this one, we subtract ax minus your bx. Okay. Ima-minus natin itong distance na ito dito. Okay. So, para makuha natin, ito siya. So, 275 minus your b cosine theta. Okay. That one. Or 275 meter minus, your b is 125 cosine 55 degrees. Okay. So, if you solve this one, you will get 203.33 meters. Okay. Now, what about for your ry? Okay. So, si y ni r is just equal to your y component ni b. Ito siya. This is just your b component. Or your y component for vector b, equal lang yun siya kay y component ni vector r. Which is b sine theta. Okay. Your b is 125 meter sine, okay, 55 degrees. Okay. You will get ry is now equal to 2.39 meters. Okay? So, meron ka ng rx and ry. Okay? Okay. So, para mas klaro, let's say this is your axis. Ito si r natin. Meron na tayong, this is your r, this is now your ry, and then this is your rx. Okay? So, equal lang yan siya, si rx, equal lang din siya dito. Okay? So, makaka-form tayo ng right triangle. Okay, nasaan yung right triangle ninyo? This one. Ayan siya. Right triangle ninyo. Itong side na ito. Okay? So, pwede natin gamitin si Pythagorean Theorem to solve for the magnitude of r. Okay? So, r is equal to square root of rx squared plus ry squared. Okay. Your rx is 203.33 meters squared plus 102.39 meters squared. Then, square root. Your r now is equal to 227.7 meters. Okay? Okay, so meron na tayong magnitude ni resultant vector. Now, what about the direction? So, si direction, gagamitin natin again si tan theta opposite over adjacent. Okay? So, in this case, andito si theta natin. Ito yung theta na kukunin natin. Your opposite is your ry. Ry over rx. Okay. So that is 102.39 over 203.33 meter, mag-cancel sa meter. That one. Okay. Now, so solve for theta, tan inverse, plug in the values, 102.39 over 203.33. Okay. Your theta will be 26 point, ano ba to? Wait lang. .7 degrees. Okay. So, meron ka ng direction, meron ka na ring magnitude. So, how to write your final answer? Your R now is equal to 227.7 meters, 26.7 degrees. Okay. Okay. So, not necessary na ilalagay ninyo dito north of east or east of north, since kapag ganito yung answer ninyo, considered siya na galing siya kay x-axis or galing siya kay east going to north. Pag ganon. Okay, pag ganon yung direction. Okay. Okay, so here is another example. Find the horizontal and vertical components of a 50 pounds force that is directed 50 degrees above the horizontal. Okay, so in this case, hindi siya gumamit ng east, north, west, or south. Okay, so we have your horizontal and vertical. So this is your vertical, this is your horizontal. Your x-axis and your y-axis. Okay, so first, you have a 50-pound force that is directed 50 degrees above the horizontal. So let's say this is your force. Okay. This is your 50-pound force. Okay. Now it is directed above the horizontal 50 degrees. So this is your 50 degrees. Okay. Now we are going to look for your horizontal and vertical components. Ito si vertical components na tinatawag. Okay, in this case, we'll call this Fy. Vertical component or Y component of your F. Okay. Bakit F yung tinawag natin? Kasi we are talking about force. Okay. Now, your X component here or your horizontal component is this one. Okay, ito siya. This is your F of X. So, I already showed you sa PowerPoint kung paano kunin si Fy. That's just equivalent to your F sin theta. Si theta dito is your 50 degrees. Okay. And then Fx, that's F cosine theta. Okay. In this case, your theta is again 50 degrees. Okay, so yan lang yung process para mahanap natin si horizontal and vertical component. And then you just plug in the values. So for Fy, your F is 50 pounds and then sine 50 degrees. Okay, so it's equivalent to 38.30 pound. Okay, and then your Fx, that's 50 pound cosine 50 degrees, you will get 32.13 pound. Okay. So yun lang yung hinahanap sa problem. So this is now your answer. Okay, another example. A newsboy starts his route from his house to a newspaper stand by walking 2.5 kilometers, 10 degrees north of west, then 3 kilometers, 40 degrees east of north. How far is he from his starting point? Okay, so we have here 2.5 kilometers, 10 degrees north of west. So let's say this is 2.5 kilometers. Yan. This is your 10 degrees. Okay, and then 3 kilometers, 40 degrees east of north. So, magdodraw naman tayo ng another plane here, or an imaginary partition plane here sa kanyang starting point. So, this is your north, east, west, and your south. Okay? So, 3 kilometers, 40 degrees east of north. So, dito, east ni north, 40 degrees. And then, 3 kilometers. Okay, so let's say this is 3 kilometers. Okay. Ito naman si 40 degrees. This one is 30 degrees. So now your resultant vector is from tail to head. So si tail kung saan tayo nag-start, and then this is now your head kung saan siya nag-end. Okay. So this is now your R. Okay. So how to look for R? We do the same process dun sa example natin kanina. Okay, so we are going to look for your, ito siya, itong distance ni R from this axis. This is your Rx. Okay, and then itong y component ni R, this one, this is your Ry. Okay, so basically ganito yan siya. Wait. A bigger scale. So this is, let's say this is your R. Okay. Ito si R natin. Kukunin natin si Rx. Okay. Ito si Rx. And then, kukunin natin si Ry. This is your Ry. Okay, so yan siya. Ito yan siya. Okay, so how? We have here your, let's say, your vector A is equal to this 2.5 km 10 degrees north of west. And then your vector B is 3 kilometers 40 degrees east of north. Okay. So yan yung given natin. We are going to get your x and y component for each vector. Okay. So kailangan natin kunin si ax and ay at saka si bx at si by. Okay. For the ax, this one, itong blue na arrow, you have a cosine theta, and then for the y, a sine theta. Okay. Since nakalay naman sa x-axis yung ating angle. Now, for the second vector, or for vector B, this is somehow confusing kasi yung angle natin is coming from your y-axis. So we have to make it na dapat galing dito si angle kay x-axis. Okay. So you just subtract 90 degrees minus 40 degrees. Okay. And then you will get 50 degrees. So ibig sabihin, from your x-axis, ang angle ng vector B natin is 50 degrees. Okay. So let's call your 50 degrees as this sign. This is phi. Okay. So, meron tayong B cosine phi and then B sine phi. That's for our vector B. Okay, now we will plug in the values. Your A is 2.5 km. Your cosine, that's 10 degrees. Okay, cosine 10 degrees. And then 2.5 km sine 10 degrees. Okay. For the B naman, for the vector B, your x component for B, that's 3 km cosine 50 degrees. And then 3 km sine 50 degrees. And then you plug in this in your calculator. Okay, for 2.5 km cosine 10 degrees, you will get 2.46 kilometers. And then for the sine, you will have 0.44 km. Okay. For 3 km cosine 50, that's 1.93. And then for the sine, that's 2.30 km. Okay, since meron na tayong values for your x and y components ng bawat vector natin, A and B, we can now solve for the x and y component of our vector R. Okay, so for the x component, since we have this point, papunta dito, okay, isubtract natin yung dalawang x component, ax minus your bx. I'm sorry, it's bx minus your ax. Okay, so bx minus ax. Yung dalawang x. Okay, so we subtract, that's 1.93 kilometers minus your ax, 2.46 kilometers. You will get your Rx is now negative 0.53 kilometers. Okay. So dito, yung negative na sign, it indicates your direction. Okay. Ibig sabihin, it goes to the west. Okay. So negative x-axis naman kasi yung papuntang x. Negative x. Okay. If you have here your x and then your y, this is your negative, this is your positive na direction. For the north and then the south, this is your negative, this is your positive na direction. So kapag negative ito, ibig sabihin, it goes to the west. So you can write this also as going to the west. Okay, so the same lang yan siya. Parehas lang yan na tama. Okay, this sign indicates that it goes to the west. Okay, now what about for your RY? Okay, for RY naman, we just add the y components of the two vectors. Okay, kasi ito yung y component ni vector A, and then this is the y component of your vector B. Okay, so this is equivalent, equal lang yan siya dito sa y component ni RY. Okay, so you just add the two vectors y components. Okay, so this is your by, this is your ay. Okay, so ay plus by, okay, that's 0.44 plus 2.30 km. Okay, you will get your Ry is now 2.74 kilometers. Okay, you can observe positive ito siya. It means that your Ry is going to be north. Okay. Okay, so north siya. Paakyat. Okay. You go to D. Okay. Ito naman, since negative siya, papunta siya doon. Sa kabila. Okay. So that's it. Okay, so that's how you solve for your x and y component ni R. Okay, so hindi pa tayo tapos. Hindi pa natin nasa-solve yung value or yung magnitude ni R. And then the direction of R. Okay, so we are going to use these values to solve for your R. Okay, so to solve for R, we use your Pythagorean Theorem. Okay, so the magnitude of R, that's your Rx, that's Rx squared plus Ry squared, square root. Okay, so you have here your negative 0.53 km squared plus 2.74 km squared, and then square root, you will get R is equal to 2.79 kilometers. Okay, so this is now your magnitude. Now what about your direction or your theta? Okay, since my theta na tsaka phi, we'll call this. Okay, so now we will solve for your beta. Okay, so I'll just call the angle beta. So pwede nyong gamitin kahit anong letters to refer for your angle. So in this case, I'll just use the beta. Okay, so we have your tan inverse opposite over hypotenuse. So in this case, yung opposite ni R is, ito yung angle na kukunin natin. So your opposite is your y, and then your adjacent is your x. Okay, or ry and then rx. So we have here ry over rx. Okay. Okay, so substitute the value. So in this case, i-neglect lang natin si negative sign ni rx. Okay, so since this is actually an absolute value. Okay, so i-neglect lang natin kasi walang negative na angle. Okay, so it should be positive. So you have here 0.53. Okay, and then your beta now, or your angle now, is equal to 79.05 degrees. Sorry. So that is now your direction. So your final answer now is R with an arrow sa itaas. Since this is now your vector, 2.79 kilometers, 79.05 degrees. So this is now your final